All right, everyone, we're in the security zone, Theater 4. We're going to start our next talk. It's on Okta Privileged Access. Zero standing privilege is no longer a myth. Our speaker today is Jason Fehrenbach from the product team at Okta Privileged Access. Jason, take it away.
All right, thank you. Excellent. Hello, everybody. I'm going to start with the most exciting slide ever, but we'll cover this quickly. I will be going over a little bit of roadmap information today, so safe harbor. Please do not make any purchasing decisions based on the roadmap. Enough said. All right, let's get into the fun stuff. As introduction, Jason Fehrenbach. I am on the product team. I've been at Okta a little over 3 years and working with PAM specifically for a very long time, over 15 years. So what I'd like to do is set a little context for everybody. Recently, I was able to hear Todd McKinnon, our CEO, talk about Okta's vision, which is to free everyone to safely use any technology. And when you hear Todd talk about that, one of the tenets or pillars of doing that is Okta's independence and neutrality. So what I'd really like to do is start to focus in on a specific aspect of that vision, and today we're going to get into privileged access management specifically. So to provide a little bit more context, the way that we look at PAM at Okta is that we are not in a silo. In fact, you'll notice we have three really key aspects of identity management. We have our access management, which I know that everybody here is familiar with if you know Okta. It's our bread and butter. It's what we're known for with our single sign-on, our MFA, our identity provider, and our access into SaaS applications. But more recently, what you may not know so well is we've expanded from IAM into the broader IDM, identity management. And we've added capabilities on the governance side with things like access requests and certifications, attestations, fine-grained entitlements. And then today, what we're really going to zero in on is the latest around privileged access management. Now, the key thing that I want you to take away from this is that we think about PAM as part of a unified platform, and so why is that important? Well, what's really interesting for me is I have so many different conversations with our customers and our potential customers that you're being asked to constantly do more. Bring up more services, support more applications, support more infrastructure. And what that means is it opens up these opportunities to have significantly large numbers that we'll call identities of silo. Where you have silos here, you have fragmentation. And the challenge that provides is when we think about what are the basic or the simple questions that we always try to answer in identity management. Who has access? What and how did they get access? And should the user continue to have access? So as we think about privileged access management, we're thinking about that in the context of reducing the number of silos that you have to manage, and therefore making it much simpler for you to answer those basic questions as I phrase them. So I want to keep drilling in deeper and deeper. I want to give you a real example of what we're doing here at Okta to bring all of these different aspects of identity together and to really take advantage of the different signals that are available to us. So we're going to go ahead and kind of walk through this together. We have our access management, our privileged access management, and our governance. But what I'd like to do is kind of like walk through this example where we talk about a user. First, we really want to make sure the who is the who. So we talk about strong authentication. We're going to use a phishing-resistant authenticator at Okta, and it's going to come from a device that meets the proper posture. So we really lock down that front door with a who. Now, where we start to get into taking advantage of these signals is now once we've authenticated the user, we start thinking about the various privileged resources that they can have access to. And we have a policy engine that I'll talk a little bit more about. But if you think about a scenario where we would now want to take that strongly authenticated user and get them access to the privileged resources, and in the example here, we're going to talk about using a vaulted or a one-time password. So think about maybe a break glass account or an emergency account. So in that world, you might want to actually make sure that there's an approval in place before we grant the user access. So we've done some integrations with our governance so that when we talk about when that approver is looking at that request, there's some very special PAM metadata that we make available so that you can see details like what is the actual server that they're trying to get to and what is the specific account. And I would compare and contrast that with what the approver does not see, for example, is they don't just see a request to be a member of a group, and then they kind of have to infer what that group actually provides. So there's a deeper level of integration there between the who, the PAM layer, and the request approval, the governance layer. And we want to do that with this frictionless request approval process. So I just mentioned that. One more thing I'll add on to that is when we think about PAM, often there's a push and pull between security and the end user experience. And we've thought really hard about how can we maintain the security side but make it more frictionless for the end user. So in our example here, what we have done is when the end user tries to access a privileged resource, at runtime, if we detect that the policy requires an approval, we will actually trigger the approval or the approval request on behalf of the user. So they don't, for example, have to pause, go to a resource catalog, search and browse for what they want to do and initiate it. Well, they just try to use what they normally use, and if an approval is required, we'll fire it off on their behalf and make that a much simpler process. And that's integrated right down to the CLI. So I wanted to pause and just kind of paint a picture for some of the things that we're doing to kind of bring access management together with privileged access with governance, so that that old adage 1 + 1 + 1 equals more than 3, right? Now, I'm going to move off this here in just a second, but really we're just getting started with the ways that we want to take advantage of those signals that we have now. And recently we talked about this with some announcements that Okta has made with our insider threat protection powered by Okta AI. But where we're going with this is we want to be able to take those risk signals that are generated in the Okta ecosystem and bring things like universal logout all the way down to the PAM layer. We want to be able to take a change in risk score and maybe require an MFA where one wasn't required, or we could potentially then also actively terminate, say, an SSH or RDP session. So we're really just getting started taking advantage of all the risk signals that we now have available as a unified platform. So let's move on. I want to help you answer a question. And so we'll see here, there's these 6 different focus areas, everything from privileged accounts all the way out to workload identity. But the key takeaway here is I know that PAM itself, privileged access management, it's a very broad term. We suffer from acronym overload in the technology space. But what I really wanted to help you understand is when you're thinking about what can Okta help solve for you, what are the specific focus areas that are important for us? So really this is just about really understanding the areas that we plan on playing in and that we do play in versus some other aspects of PAM that may be out of our current focus. So I just want to help you answer the question, can Okta help solve a problem for me? So let's get more specific. Obviously, we're here at reInvent, very excited to be here. We know from talking to our conversations that one of the 7,000 integrations that we have in our OIN catalog, one of our most popular integrations is with AWS. We know everybody is using AWS, they're using it with Okta. So I wanted to kind of give some more specific examples of some of the use cases that we can solve, and I selected EC2 as my example here. So what's really interesting when I have these conversations with people that are leveraging EC2, sometimes the projects are a little bit more like lift and shift, where there's a durability to the server infrastructure. It's around for a long time. Conversely, sometimes EC2, it's very ephemeral. You spin it up, you spin it down, and you only need it for a very short period of time. So when we take that context and we talk about privileged access, we have a use case for EC2 that we'll call our infrastructure access. And in short, what that allows us to do is to get an Okta user onto an EC2 instance in a just-in-time fashion, where we do things like create and manage the account lifecycle completely dynamically for you, so the account only exists while the user's logged in, and when they log off, we remove it. So it's another defense in depth strategy. And one more detail about this approach is that we also move away from needing to use an SSH key or a password. We go to an incredibly ephemeral, tightly scoped client certificate approach, which really just means it's one less thing to be compromised, stolen, or abused. So think about this, if you were to think about the world of SaaS applications where we have protocols like SAML and OIDC, well, we don't quite have that at the infrastructure layer, right? We're dealing with SSH and RDP. But if you think about SSH, it can support a password-based auth, it can support a public-private key, a key-based auth, but SSH also supports client certificate-based auth. So that's the magic that we bring to the table here, to get a user onto a server in a way that we don't require a password, in a way that's just in time. Now that's one use case. I want to quickly talk about one more use case. Now let's assume on those servers that you have other accounts that you want to protect. It's not just getting a user onto the server with their own individual account. Maybe you have the root account, maybe you have service accounts. We also have a set of capabilities now that can come in and do discovery on those servers. You can onboard those accounts into Okta, and we can do some of the more traditional use cases where we can take over ownership of the passwords for those accounts. We put them in our vaults. We can rotate them on a schedule. We have a granular access policy for who's allowed to use those accounts, impersonate. We provide the individual accountability, the audit trail. And one more thing around that is we actually also go one step further, that we are actively monitoring for any out-of-band password changes to those accounts. And if we detect that, we will automatically remediate that, take back ownership of the password. Again, our goal is, first of all, our goal is to remove passwords altogether. In a modern world, we want to reduce passwords, eliminate them, get rid of them altogether. And then in the scenarios where we do have to have a password, we want to completely reduce the time that it's valid for. So we rotate it, we change it, and if we detect somebody else has taken it over, we will immediately take it back and rotate it. So I wanted to give you a couple real world examples of some of these details down at the EC2 level. On the compliance control side, there's some additional controls. We can put session recording on any of those use cases I mentioned. And we have a very flexible policy engine that I'll talk about in just a moment, where we can do some additional things to secure both use cases. So let's go ahead and talk about another exciting example. And the way that I want to set up this transactional MFA, and there's a lot of words on here. We have some lovely benefits that we can all appreciate when it comes to MFA and some screenshots. But what I want to do is provide another example. So let's use a SaaS application again as an example, because we've all probably done a login to a SaaS app, and probably in many of the scenarios, we might have to do a multi-factor before we get the SaaS app to launch. But let's take that a step further. Let's say that now somewhere within our SaaS application, there's maybe the opportunity to transfer funds, right? Maybe it's a classic finance or banking. And so maybe now at the time that we want to click the button to transfer funds, we might want to prompt for an additional multi-factor at that point in time. So we'll call that an example of a transactional MFA. So we're not just talking about MFA through the front door, we're talking about a more granular transactional MFA. So if I bring that now back into the context of PAM and into our use case of getting onto an EC2 server, of course we can authenticate our users when they want to access the PAM system itself. We support all of the great controls that Okta supports with the phishing resistant authenticators, all the fun stuff, right? But now what we've done is we brought that more granular level of control down. And specifically in our use case, what we can do is every initiation of an SSH or RDP connection, we can prompt for an MFA at that point in time on that individual connection. Now, I smile a little bit because there's going to be, again, that push and pull between the friction an end user goes through and what security wants to see. But what this has really been driven by is things like cyber insurance, or there's some clauses in things like a PCI regulation, where depending on who your auditor is, they're going to want to see you enforce an MFA on every connection. And so with the model that we've implemented, we've moved away from having to install, say, a credential provider or a pluggable authentication module on all your infrastructure. We now enforce this at the Okta layer. So that's a huge value add from your perspective, right? One less piece of software, one less access policy you need to manage. So we've helped you unify everything. But the point is, we now support things like transactional MFA, and we support it today at the server level. And as we add, we'll talk about a few of the more capabilities, but as we roll out our secrets management, databases, Active Directory, this transactional MFA will be in our policy engine so that you can take advantage of it for other things as well. So we're really excited to finally be able to talk about that and release that. It's been a very popular request. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I've been really focusing in on EC2 and using the server-based access as one of the examples to talk through some of these different capabilities. But our vision at Okta is much broader than just EC2. And so we've recently announced and we've releasing some new capabilities that we'll talk about here, but this really gets us into more around the notion that if you're using AWS, probably people here are even more familiar than I am, but you have things like your IAM policies, you have your AWS accounts, you have your various permission sets, and what you have is a whole nother layer that you have to now worry about when it comes to access, least privilege, and entitlements. So what our vision is, and what we want to help you do, is first we have a set of capabilities now to be able to connect to your AWS organization and to discover not just accounts, but we can discover permission sets, resources, and policies. And we'll help paint a picture for you as to what your current landscape looks like. And then we'll do some analysis to provide some recommendations. So our goal is to help you right-size your entitlements in AWS. Get you down to a least privileged model. Remove things like wildcard access or over-permissioned access, right? So really we want to scope that down so that the users have what they need to have, but no more. That's always our goal with privileged access, right? Least privilege. So that's a new set of capabilities, and that is going to be releasing as part of our GA on December 1. So this is brand new, hot off the presses for us, so I'm happy to talk about it here for a few minutes. And I just want to share one more detail around that, is what we've really talked about is the problem of discovery, analysis, and right sizing. Okta already has integrations with identity centers so that we can then allow an end user to actually request, and we'll do the fulfillment to be able to allow them to then use those entitlements in AWS, right, with the Access Management Console, the single sign-on and the Access Management Console. But we have further plans for that. We want to also take that a step further and be able to then layer in the PAM policies that I've been talking about so that we can then get the advantages of the transactional MFA, we can do the request approval on demand with the time-bound access. So we're really just getting started here, but we thought a great place to start was to really helping you solve some of the problems around right sizing and then be able to eventually layer in the more granular access controls. So that's really exciting for us. Okay, one more thing. This is really a bit of, we haven't talked about this at all, but because Okta Privileged Access is rolling out on December 1 to all customers, there is one more set of capabilities that we haven't talked about yet, so I thought I would just briefly mention it. As part of that vaulting layer that I did mention earlier when we were talking about the EC2 use case where we can discover local accounts and vault the passwords for them, well, we're using that same vaulting service, but we've greatly expanded on the use cases that it can support. And one really powerful foundational use case is to be able to then take that and support the ability to put controls around your static secrets. So think about this as a potential replacement for a password management tool. The way we've implemented this, it's a key value pair model. So we can come in and basically username, password, API token, certificate, anything that is a secret, we can put that into the Okta Vault, and then we can apply the same policies around that we do for things like EC2 access or other things so that you have now control over who in your organization has access to these secrets. So it's a new set of capabilities to then make it one less thing you have to manage, but to expand what we can do with our vaulting service and with our policy engine. If you want to then put a request and approval around who can access a secret, if you want to go in, we'll be releasing the transactional MFA support relatively soon for that, so you have to do like a step-up MFA to get a secret. That's all coming as well, so that's part of the plan there. So let me wrap up what really is a lightning talk for you with our roadmap. I just want to kind of let you look at this. This will be available in the collateral. But everything that we've talked about here on stage in the left-hand column is available now today. And then the middle column here, this is what's rolling out on December 1. So we're literally days, hours away. And it's all the functionality on the left-hand side, and then some of the new things I just touched on with the secrets management, with the AWS entitlements, discovery analysis. And I didn't quite mention the privileged elevation, but that's another very useful use case if you want to get into an EC2 server and then elevate to have like sudo or to have like local administrator. And then for us, frankly, the fun is just beginning. This is the world we live in, where now that we release, it's just going to be constant iterations and new things, which is exciting for everybody. But in the far right-hand column, that's kind of lets you into a little bit of a preview as to now where we're going next. And maybe what I'll call out is just finally here on the bottom right-hand side, we're putting a lot of time and energy right now into helping you develop some new capabilities to protect service accounts, both in Okta's Universal Directory, but also SaaS applications as well. That's another layer that we want to help put some controls around. So, my time is up. I invite you all to come talk further with me over at our booth. The Okta booth is in the back corner over here. If you have any questions on roadmap, capabilities, or anything I didn't cover today, please feel free to stop by. All right, thanks everybody.